Hello, welcome back to the OJROM channel. In this video, we'll make a button-up dress that you can wear comfortably in the summer. Also, you can make a sleeveless dress. There are two types of skirt lengths, long and midi. The new pattern is Our Memories Dress. It's also dressed with memories of me and my mom's summer vacation in 2023. And I named it hoping to capture your beautiful moments too. More information about the PDF patterns and instruction can be found in the description below. And here's a video on how to print the pattern and how to assemble it. Please refer to the link above. These are the fabric and material that I will use today. I use a light cotton fabric, and I recommend lightweight fabrics such as cotton, linen, seersucker, viscose. For the interfacing, I recommend soft and lightweight silk interfacing. It is mainly used for summer jackets or summer dresses. First, draw darts for the front and back bodies and sew them. After cutting, be sure to mark the back center and armor notches. Sew the dart you draw. When sewing darts, always sew from the end to the center. The center of the dart notch the thread without turning back. Iron the sewn darts to all the sides. Overlock the shoulder and side seam of the front and back bodies. Put the front and back bodies right sides together and sew the shoulder and side seams with a 1 cm seam allowance. Make sure there is an ease on the back shoulder. Stretch and sew the front panel to the notch of the back panel. Press the shoulder and side seam open. If you want to make a sleeveless top, try on the top and pin the front center. Then dart the spare part in the armor. Prepare sleeves and cuffs. Be sure to mark the center notch. Then gather the fabric 0.7 cm from the edge of the sleeves. Set the tension high and the stitch length wide to make a gathering. Before sewing, you must pull out a long thread so that the gathering does not come loose. After overlocking the side seam of the sleeve, sew 1 cm. Fold the cuff in half and iron it. Then fold the seam allowance 1 cm on one side only. Sew 1 cm of the side seam of the cuff. Press the seam open. I'll tell you how to sew the cuff neatly on the inside and outside without overlocking it. The gathering at the hem of the sleeve should be placed closer to the center than the side seam, so that the puff sleeve is sewn much prettier. Sew the sleeve 1 cm through the cuff. Place the cuffs on the outside of the sleeve as it was previously folded, and top stitch 0.2 cm. Fix the fabric with pins so that it does not move. Both the outside and the inside are beautifully stitched. Put the body and sleeve right sides together and sew 1 cm. After matching the armhole notch, adjust together. After sewing, overlock the seam allowance. This time, I'll tell you how to sew the facing neatly without overlocking it. Put the facing and interfacing right side together and sew 1 cm. After sewing, cut the seam allowance to 0.5 cm for the back facing. Iron only the edge of the interfacing and attach the entire interfacing. In this way, the side line of the facing is neat. Similarly, for the back facing, iron only the edge first and then attach the entire interfacing. Put the front facing and back facing right side together and sew 1 cm. Press the seam open. After the seam open, you can see a protruding seam allowance. At this time, fold the seam allowance into a triangle and stitch it neatly. After attach the interfacing to the collar, draw the finish line on the inside. The interfacing of the under collar must be cut with a bias and then attach it. Draw the fold line on the outer side of the undercollar. Sewing only the undercollar along the line. Mark the location where the collar will sew on the outside of the facing. Sew 1 cm of facing and top collar. Sew on the left side and right side in 2 parts based on the center of the back. Cut only the body side. After sewing, check the collar. Sew the other side similarly. Make sure this time the body plate is on top. Press the seam up. The seam allowances of the fold line are naturally overlapped. The seam allowance at the back of the neck is curved, so cut 2 or 3 places to make it look pretty. Sew the undercollar and bodice in the same way as the top collar and facing. Mark the location where the color will sew on the outside of the bodice. Sew on the left side and right sides in two parts based on the center of the back. Press the seam open. Cut the back neckline seam along several times. Sew 1 cm of the top color and under color. Sew only to the end of the collar, not facing. This time we sew the facing part. To prevent the collar from being sewn into the facing, cut the seam allowance to the end and sew so that the collar and the facing are completely separated. Diagonally cut the angle parts of the collar and facing. Then fold the seam allowance and turn it over to make a pretty collar. And press the front facing seam open. Then iron it again from the outside so that the facing is not visible from the front panel. And from the point where the facing is folded, iron the facing so that it is visible from the front plate. Likewise, when ironing the collar, press the collar seam open. Then iron it so that the undercollar is not visible. Now the collar and facing are moving, but I hand sew the seam allowances so that the collar does not move. Baste the bottom seam allowance of the bodice and the top seam allowance of the facing. At this time, sew from the fold line of the collar to the fold line. Next, make 3 loops on the shoulders to keep the facing from turning over. Stitch 0.2 cm only to the location where the first button will sew, so that the front panel and front facing can be fixed. Draw a 3 cm to attach the interfacing to the front skirt. Then attach a 6 cm wide interfacing. Fold the seam allowance of the front skirt twice and sew it. The folded part is the inside of the skirt. Fix the fabric with pins. Overlock the side seam of the skirt, and the pockets are also overlocked except for the side line. Place the pocket properly on the notch mark and sew 0.7 cm. Cut only the seam allowance of the pocket so that it is 0.3 cm. Turn the pocket over to the outside and top stitch 0.2 cm. Sew the back skirt as well as the front. Put the front skirt and back skirt right sides together and sew 1 cm. Before sewing, pin the fabric so that it does not move. Press the seam open. The pocket seam allowance is ironed facing forward. Then the hem of the skirt is sewn by folding 1 cm twice. Now adjust the tension to make a gathering on the skirt waistline, except pocket part. I divide the shirring into the 3 places: front, back, and front. Prepare a waist belt without interfacing attached. Put the 2 waist belts right side together and sew 1 cm at the side seam. Press the seam open. Then fold 1 cm on one side of the waist belt. Stitch 0.5 cm so that the front facing does not move. Now insert the top between the waist belts to fit the side line and back center notches. At this time, place the previously folded seam allowance on the inside of the top so that it can be sewed to the inside of the skirt later. Sew 1 cm of the waist belt and top. After sewing, cut the corner of the interfacing diagonally and turn the waist belt inside out. And iron it again. Now adjust the gathering after aligning the knots of the skirt and waist belt first. And then sew 1 cm. Place the folded seam allowance on the 1 cm sewn line and sew the stitch or invisible hand sewn. Pin the waist belt to keep it from moving. It is so neatly sewn on both the outside and the inside. Sew buttons according to the pattern. When sewing buttons by hand, inserting a toothpick between the thread and sewing will prevent the button from sticking to the fabric. To make a buttonhole, put a 12mm button on the buttonhole foot. After changing the presser foot, set up the sewing machine. Practice buttonholes on the remaining fabric first. Align the presser foot with the button line of the buttonhole. It is better to use a seam ripper and then cut the hole with a scissor. Prepare a piece of fabric to make the belt loop. Fold the fabric to make a 1 cm string, and then sew both ends. Belt loops are sewn in the center of the back and both sides lined. Finally, our sewing of the dress is finished. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you all have good memories with this dress.